I got my doctorate from Lancaster University and I worked here for a number of years and I worked on ornamental plants. However, about 3 years ago, moved more towards arable crops because it was much more of an open door. People were very receptive to new ideas. And so I started Eutrema, which is Latin for wasabi, just because I like wasabi, that's why it's called. And it sounds like an agrochemical company, doesn't it? We founded in 2020 in lockdown, so I was the only person who opened an office in lockdown. We're based in Daventry, which is the epicenter of blackgrass, which is a major weed. And we serve agriculture, horticulture, hydroponics, wastewater sectors. And we focus on chemistry that involves getting things into solution that normally aren't supposed to go into solution. And then biologicals, so chemicals and biologicals, which is like the biological equivalent of chemicals. And I say I own this company. I've worked in biologicals for a number of years. And regenerative farming is a major growth area. Not to be confused with organic farming, which is just not using synthetic pesticides. It's a lot more receptive to scientific principles than organic farming. And there's certain core key principles in regenerative farming. And some people treat these as the law. Others think that, depends on your local situation, which ones you use. But the ones that affect soil health focus on minimizing soil disturbance. So things like no-till, min-till, and direct drilling. Use of biologicals before or instead of chemicals. So maybe like integrated nutrient management, integrated pest management. I'm going to talk about the quality of the advice that are given to farmers, which is very important, cover crops, and increasing soil organic matter content. So minimizing soil disturbance. The perfect structure for a soil is a crumb structure, like a biscuit. And so you want to be avoiding things like pans, where when you cultivate the soil to a certain depth, you get a pan, and then that pan impedes drainage. Wherever you impede drainage, you're going to get flooding, and flooding is normally deleterious to soil biology, the lack of oxygen, and not only does that result in anaerobic microbes that are not necessarily beneficial to the crop, it's a change in the whole microbial and biological community that happens when that occurs. So you want to avoid flooding where possible. You also want to reduce erosion, protect biological networks. So you can imagine if you're ploughing a field up, all those fungal networks that are developed just are destroyed instantly. But there are other networks other than fungal networks. There's biofilms and things that we don't know about or know much about. Obviously, if you're reducing diesel usage, there's a carbon impact there. And there are pros and cons from a pest and disease perspective. So for every benefit of no-till or min-till from a pest and disease perspective, there's always a disadvantage for another pest and disease. That's the thing in farming. For every, you'll say like, delay your drilling because of this problem, and then there's another problem that appears from delaying your drilling. Some crops, it's not possible to use things like min-till, no-till, or direct drilling. So there was a project a couple of years ago looking at no-till potatoes, and funnily enough, it didn't work because potatoes you need to build up the soil around the plant, and you also, at the end of the day, you need to get those potatoes out of the ground, and that's not easy if you haven't ploughed the soil. So there's a lot of area and research needs to be done by agricultural engineers still on that area. So it says the use of biologic instead of chemicals is always going to be a benefit. Can't imagine a situation where putting more chemicals is going to help soil biology, but unless it's carbon. Biologicals fall into three main areas. There's biostimulants, biopesticides, and biofertilizers. Biostimulants are things that you add of biological origin that improve the crop's growth, not through nutrition and not through having a pesticidal effect. So there's somewhere separate. Biopesticides obviously have an effect on a pest or a disease, and biofertilizers are adding nutrition. And then these three categories can, the actual compounds or things can be, the living organisms fall into different areas. So there's obviously the microbials, the fungi, the bacteria, nematodes, beneficial nematodes, compost teas, which are like a brew of lots of different microorganisms, protozoas, anthrax, whatever you want in that tea can be put in there. Whatever you don't want can get in there. And you can seed them with different microbes. So those are microbials. And chitosan, that's an area where at Eutrema we specialise in. But there's also things like carbohydrates, molasses. Plant extracts is a major area. So things like knotweed extract is a major biopesticide used in America. Yucca extract is something that we use as a wetting agent for soils. There's fish hydrolysates, which are a fertiliser, humic acids, which are a biostimulant, and seaweed extracts, which are biostimulants and biopesticides. And it's another area where Eutrema works on and does a lot of research on. So if we look at chitosan, chitosan is the soluble form of chitin that's in all fungal cells and all insects. So plants have evolved to detect it as non-self. It's not in plants. And it induces plant defense mechanisms. So they've evolved it so that when a fungus tries to attack, it detects the chitin or the chitosan. However, fungi have then evolved on top of that to turn off those defense mechanisms. So they produce enzymes and carbohydrates and metalloenzymes that silence the plant's ability to detect it. So what we do is we go on and spray chitosan everywhere and turn on those plant defenses again and overcome those fungal mechanisms. It also feeds beneficial microbes. It flocculates the spores. It stops the spores from being spread from the disease, and it forms a physical layer over the plant, so like a micro layer. So that's very different to the biocidal fungicides that you would be putting onto a crop. And you imagine they may go onto the foliage, they might go into the soil, and that will have a dramatic impact on the biology of the soil and the life of the soil. And it's an EU basic substance. This is one of the fantastic examples where EU regulations has made my life easier. There are not many, and that is one of them. So I'm very thankful to that. The other area where we work on is blackgrass pathogen spores, and this is a massive area of research for us, and we developed it over the last few years. And it's culturing a type of powdery mildew and a type of rust that attacks blackgrass, which is a disease, is a weed that causes billions of pounds worth of damage to arable crops in England. And we seed the fields early on in the spring with the spores, and they hopefully develop a disease and then the cereal will overtake them, and you'll be eradicated from of blackgrass, which has massive potential. It's got potential to reduce herbicide use on arable land and obviously make these situations economical. In some areas, blackgrass could destroy the profitability of a farm. It's that stark. And where we're based in Daventry, this is a field here that's had to spray their whole crop off with glyphosate and destroy it. And then hopefully to control the blackgrass. They then planted barley the next year, and that field was completely blackgrass the next year. So this didn't work, and it was 99.9% blackgrass the next year. So that will probably go either into pasture or probably wind farms as well. You can see there's wind farms over there, and that's an issue. And then this is in a catchment area, water catchment area, where they're having massive problems with the herbicide propizamide, which they cannot get out of the water. And this was another issue with slug pellets. So they used to have a compound called metaldehyde in slug pellets, which was really good at killing slugs, but also you couldn't get out of the water. It was also ridiculously toxic. And so the water companies were a driving force in getting that banned, and there'll be a driving force in trying to get propizamide banned. And so anything we can do to reduce the use of herbicides would be good for farming and and potentially soil health and water quality. So these are the two diseases we're looking at. This is the mildew on the left and rust on the right, and these only attack blackgrass. So we chose two diseases that we knew wouldn't affect cereal crops, because if we started spraying spores onto cereal crops that killed cereals, then I'd go bankrupt with the compensation. So we had to choose ones that we definitely knew we're not going to do that. And blackgrass is very unrelated to cereals, so that was good. So we got lots of farmers to send in samples, and we isolated them, and we now culture the spores, and we use techniques that weren't available until about 2016. Normally you can't culture these pathogens, and we send them out test tubes bigger than these Eppendorfs here, full of spores, and I joke that they're more expensive per gram than cocaine, so don't sniff it. And also, it's, they get caught with these test tubes full of powder. It's a big problem. And I've currently got an issue because there's a French grower that wants to use it, and I was like, do I take them over on the ferry, or do I post them, or what do I do? They're non-hazardous as well. There's a lot of fungal diseases that attack blackgrass that are also highly poisonous, like ergot, which is hallucinogenic and will give you stomach cramps and make you very ill. So, but you always have to be careful with any spores, even compost and things like that, because if you inhale all spores, you get something called farmer's lung, which is a debilitating disease. And then because they're not culturable on agar, you have to stain them to check they're still alive. And so you can see here there's 5 spores that are alive and 1 that's dead. And you also have to make sure they go through the filter for the farmers. This guy here has got a biological weapon, and this is called a rust bomb. And this was developed by the Americans in the late 1950s to go over the Soviet Union, blow up in the upper atmosphere, and rain down spores over Soviet wheat and starve the Russians to death. And it wouldn't attack German wheat or British wheat or American wheat because because they knew it was species specific. So all the research on biological weapons has helped me develop my biological weapon for wheat and blackgrass. And interestingly, Stan Hussein had a wheat smut bomb that was going to go over to Iran and kill and starve the Iranians, and that was in Tony Blair's dodgy dossier. And he said, Saddam Hussein's got biological weapons, and anthrax is a biological weapon. And he didn't say that he's got a wheat smut one. But what they also found was that it was also being illegal against the Convention on Biological Weapons. The spores didn't last very long, so they had to be continually produced. And so it was a very expensive bomb to have compared to a nuclear bomb in the long term. And so they just decided to focus on nuclear bombs. And so that's informed us that we have to continually produce our rust spores again and again to keep them viable. And then this is a trial by one of our partner distributors, Agrovista. And this was really interesting because there was really clear differences between the two plots. It was almost like I had gone in there and hand weeded the side with the spores, but I hadn't. I contemplated it, but I never did it. And you could see there was a clear difference. I was really impressed. But what they did show, certain strips they missed the conventional herbicide, and there was no difference between the two on the amount of blackgrass on either side. And so it was not an alternative to herbicides. It was potentially reduce the amount of herbicide or complement it, but it was not a like-for-like replacement. But we're working on the technology to improve the amounts of spores we can deliver. Last year was very, very wet, and so all our spores had to go on very close to when a fungicide was going on, and that was an issue. That's enough about that. Other things when it comes to soil biology and regenerative farms. Copper fertilizers, if you've seen me on Twitter, I bang on about copper fertilizers because I hate them. They're banned. Copper pesticides are banned on every crop apart from grapes in the UK. Don't know why they're still allowed on grapes. But it is sold as copper fertilizer. And this annoys me because there's no copper deficiency in UK soils. And so why should they be selling copper fertilizers? It's to get around this, and especially diseases like Pythium and oomycetes like Phytophthora. I say oomycetes because it's a double O, and I like saying oomycetes. And so copper is a heavy metal, it's residual, it will be killing the soil biology and also the biology on the plant. You may get a yield bump from applying them, but that's because often when plants are infected with a disease, they don't show symptoms, and so you're killing a disease and increasing your yield. So that's a big bugbear of mine when it comes to soil biology. Cobalt and nickel fertilizers, that's another bugbear of mine. They're promoted by a number of high-profile regen gurus with little to no scientific training, and they're purported to improve nutrient use efficiency, especially nitrogen. However, there's no soil deficiency in copper, cobalt and nickel. These are contaminant heavy metals that are required in extremely small amounts, and it's never been scientifically demonstrated that they're an essential nutrient. And copper sulfate and nickel sulfate is carcinogenic when you buy it as a powder. It's also carcinogenic, still classed as carcinogen, when it's diluted and it's being sprayed on the field. And so the farmer is inhaling that, the person walking their dog is inhaling that, and it will be extremely poisonous to soil biology. And it also annoys me, the same gurus that claim that farmers shouldn't use nitrates because they're carcinogenic, which they're not, are saying that they should use cobalt and nickel. And I think this is somewhere where the scientific community needs to come together and call out unscientific claims when it comes to regenerative farming. There is some good advice, and there are magazines that farmers can get access to when it comes to soil biology, and there are exciting trade shows and conferences. There's a whole regen conference in November this year in York, which should be good. Just before that, I should have a slide about the conventional agrochemical industry, and they've got some other issues that affect soil biology. So applying phosphorus to soil will harm mycorrhiza, because the mycorrhiza fungi, their main job is solubilizing phosphorus and giving it to the plant. If you dump a load of phosphorus on a crop, the plants will turn off their mycorrhizal connections and not feed the sugars into the mycorrhiza because they've got adequate phosphorus. So that's a massive impact on soil biology. Urea now has to be supplied with urease inhibitors in it at certain times of the year. Is that correct, guys? And urease inhibitors will have a direct impact on soil biology because they're toxic chemicals. Some of them are, impede the growth and development of young-born children and stuff like that. If you look into them, they're quite nasty chemicals. And because they're not a pesticide, they don't have to go through all the safety regulations that pesticides do. Glyphosates, everyone's favourite weed killer. It binds manganese in the soil, and if you look at manganese sales globally, loads of manganese goes out to Brazil and America because they've got glyphosate resistant crops, so they're spraying glyphosate over their crops, and the manganese has been bound into the soil, and the plants and the bacteria can't access manganese. So plants need manganese, but especially bacteria need manganese, and you're not going to get a functioning soil biology if you're putting a lot of glyphosate on the soil. And then I didn't mention other positive things like biosolids, anaerobic digestates, guano, bat poo, and things like Ben's been talking about today, where you're adding soil carbon. These are fantastic for adding bioavailable carbon to the soil, which will not only is carbon sequestration a good thing, but feeding soil biology the more, to a point, as long as you're not getting anaerobic, adding more carbon so that the saprophytes, the organisms that are breaking down dead and decaying matter, will have a positive effect on the soil biology. And then I also work in sports turf, which is not regenerative agriculture, and there it's even worse, where they're putting iron and zinc, pesticides. They're trying to kill worms all the time in sports turf. And so if you think it's bad in agriculture, you should look at sports turf, and that's even worse. So, but yeah, so there's plenty of positives, some negatives, and if anyone wants to discuss any aspects of my whistle-stop tour of soil biology on regenerative farms, let me know. Oh, and lastly, if you want to listen to one of my podcasts, I've got Serial Killers, the podcast all about pest, disease, and weeds of arable crops. Or if you grow hydroponically, I've got Hydroponics Daily, which is I'd stupidly decided to do a daily podcast, which is a lot of work, but yeah, a lot of fun as well. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ross.